They have intentionally withheld information that has caused a harm to the world that has never been seen. That's the fact. No one can dispute that. And isn't it time that we say to China, you must pay for what you've done to our country? You made a decision not to contain a virus that could affect our country. You made a decision to silence the people who were talking about it. You made a decision not to tell us about it until it was too late. It's time that you pay for what you've done if you want to participate with our people using your goods, making money for your GDP in our country.
Should the Chinese regime be compelled to pay legal damages for mishandling and deliberately covering up the CCP virus or coronavirus outbreak? In practice, how could the Chinese regime actually be held accountable? What precedents are there? What could be used as leverage? In this episode, we sit down with Jeremy Alters, the chief strategist and non-attorney spokesperson of the Berman Law Group, which is filing a class action lawsuit against the People's Republic of China for how it handled the COVID-19 outbreak. Alters previously launched and won a major class action suit against Chinese manufacturers of defective drywall. In his legal career, Alters has settled cases and achieved verdicts totaling over $4.5 billion. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Jeremy Alters, so great to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So Jeremy, you are the non-attorney spokesperson for a very important lawsuit that we've been tracking, that we've been reporting on at the Epoch Times, basically taking China or the Chinese Communist Party to task for COVID-19, for the CCP virus, as we're calling it now, for the pandemic that started in China. Before we dive into the whole lawsuit and so forth, I find it fascinating that you're a non-attorney on this case, because you've very much been an attorney throughout your life, and you've been on some incredible lawsuits, including taking China to task in the past. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that to start.
Sure. I was an attorney for about 20 years, handled some of the largest cases in the United States, including going after China, as you mentioned, and going after the US banks that had resequenced overdrafts of people and settled those cases for billions of dollars. And the China case was very interesting because it involved both a German and Chinese corporation, and then separately a Chinese nationalized corporation, which we took to task to get them to pay for defective drywall that they had shipped to our shores. And it was a long process, but it was highly successful and lays some precedent for a case like this.
Well, it's a very fascinating case because, and we'll go into this deeper a bit later, but there's always this question of, okay, sure, you're going to do a legal case. Oh, wow, and now it's a state actor, so they may they're going to say they have immunity and so forth. There's that issue, but then there's also, like, let's say you get it. Let's say you get the settlement. How can you actually get the money, right? And in this case with China drywall, very prominent case, I think in 2009. I mean the whole time period around there, you actually got money, and that I find that remarkable. If you could talk a bit about that.
Sure, we did. We collected about $1 billion from the German Chinese corporation, and recently the Chinese nationalized corporation called Taishan Gypsum settled for, it was either 245 or 248 million, I don't know the exact number, very recently in the last year. And we did that by getting verdicts against them and bringing them to the table because they were forced to by threats by both plaintiffs' lawyers and the judges about their business interests in New Orleans and other places, and their ships and other cargo that they were bringing to our shores. And so we've always been of the opinion, and would be of the opinion in this case, the lawyers here at the Berman Law Group and my own personal opinion, if China is going to do business here and they're going to make a large portion of their GDP here in the United States and they harm our citizens, how is it that we don't hold them accountable for what they've done? Why should they be able to profit and not have to pay for the liability and the damage they've caused? That was the theory in the Chinese drywall case, and been the theory in other cases that we've been involved in. And that is the theory here to a much greater extent here, because you're talking about a worldwide pandemic that has fallen on our people. 320 million people or so, however many we have in the United States now, are directly affected by their bad acts, and we can't let it stand.
Well, so tell me a little bit about the lawsuit now. I find it, absolutely fascinating, and especially I want to dive into afterwards this question of sovereign immunity, which is, of course, the big question that everyone's going to ask. But for starters, tell me, what do you think actually allows for there to be a lawsuit of sorts? And are we talking criminal? Are we talking, commercial? How does this work?
The firm's position is that under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, which was established in 1976, there are you're not supposed to be able to sue foreign countries in general. That's the theory. Why that's the theory, I'm not exactly sure, and I don't particularly like it, but that's the theory. The reality is, in that Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, there are exceptions that allow you to sue countries like China. Those exceptions include non commercial tort activity, business exception activity, and terrorism exceptions. Now, again, this was established in 1976, and many things have happened since then, including courts around the United States expanding those exceptions. So, under the firm's theory of the case, China has unleashed a pandemic, dropped a viral bomb on our world, on our country, on our people. And that bomb that they dropped, they did not have to send. They could have contained it. They could have prevented it. At least 95% of what happened here in the United States could have been prevented if China would have done their job as a sovereign nation. They did not. So now we fall under these exceptions. And a couple of the expansions on the exceptions are, did they break their own laws? Did they violate their own laws? And we say yes, because the wet markets that are open in Wuhan, I think they're open again as of yesterday, were supposed to be closed down years ago. And we can't figure out why the CCP and the Chinese government, and to be very clear, and I'm digressing just a bit, but we don't blame the people of China in our lawsuit. We blame the government of China and the heads of the Communist Party of China and the virology lab in China and different entities, but we don't blame the people. We think they're victims just like we are of the same propaganda and the same, excuse my language, nonsense that they spew. So under these exceptions, there is a business activity exception. China broke their own laws by allowing the wet markets to continue. Those wet markets, whether intentionally or unintentionally, are the source of the virus. That is where it could have been contained. But the markets should not be open. It's a violation of their own law. Why did they let them stay open? They let them stay open because they make $1 billion from it. They make $1 billion a year from the exotic trade of animals that pass through those markets. They act like they know nothing about it, but it's not true. So under that exception, meaning they broke their own law, we believe we can pursue this case. That's one. Number two is, did they fail to warn of an inherent danger to our country? I don't think there's anybody in the United States that would disagree they failed to properly warn us of what was going on. And the Ninth Circuit Court, which is based in California, Washington, those areas, has said that if there's a failure to warn of an inherent danger, that is an exception on top of the exceptions that exist. So it's an enhancement of the exception that allows you to pursue this case. The case allowed it to go forward then, and we think here it will allow it to go forward. And then the final one is, and the most egregious one, if it is an egregious act against the precepts of humanity, the courts here in the United States have said that's allowed to go forward. Now, I don't know of any more egregious act that we've ever seen, except possibly 9/11, where a country knew of a bad act that was taking place. They allowed it to come to the United States. They allowed it to permeate our society and our people. It's caused a massive economic meltdown. People are dying. And by the way, people are dying. This isn't numbers. It seems on the TV programs these days, every person's just a number. You see 2,000, 3,000. These are human beings. These are people's businesses. These are people's livelihoods. 10 million people have lost their jobs in 2 weeks, all because China did not contain a virus they knew about and did not tell us about it when they could have. So we think that is an egregious act against the precepts of humanity. And we think under those enhancements to the exceptions, this will go forward and be successful.
That's absolutely fascinating. I think we're getting a small legal class here from you. Tell me a little bit about, the details in the case of where you think China went wrong, where you think you have a compelling case.
So as early as December for certain, if not November or earlier, China knew that an individual or individuals in Wuhan had been diagnosed with a strange coronavirus they called COVID-19. We know that as early as December 10th, someone was diagnosed, and as early as December 16th, the government knew about it. So, if that's true, and we've been living in this now for, let's say, 2.5 weeks, can you imagine what the extra month and a half would have done for us in terms of preparation and prevention? They didn't give it to us. So, under our theory, they had knowledge of a known danger and they failed to tell us. They had knowledge of something that could egregiously affect humanity and they neglected to tell us. And by the way, I don't think it's neglect. I think it was intentional. I think China has been and continues to be an opportunistic country. And this is an economic boom for them in the future. Having the United States be down helps China come up, and it's not unintentional. So that is the premise from where we are, but there's more to it, and the more to it is we know that this virus originated either in that lab or in those wet markets. When that happened, all China had to do is what they always do to people in China is lock it down, close it up, contain the virus, keep it in one place. Don't let it spread. And oh, by the way, don't let 5 million people flee your province and have some of them come to the United States. So again, we think that is evidence that will play very strongly into this becoming part of the exceptions to the FSIA rule. But it takes it even one step further. They did what they always do. They silenced the people who were telling the truth. And that is, again, against the egregious precepts of humanity. How do you have 8 doctors on WeChat talking about this novel virus? We call it novel because that's what it says in the reports. I don't know if it was novel there or not. But this novel virus, and when they have the information about it, and their doctor is treating it, and their other doctors are seeing it, they are not allowed to talk about the truth on WeChat? Why are they not allowed to talk about truth? Why do people disappear when they start talking about the truth? Why is someone missing right now after an Australian news program? I mean, we can go down the list, but how many times, and this is the real question for the law firm, how many times are we going to let them get away with it? I mean, this isn't the first time they've done things like this. Certainly the worst that they've ever done, but not the first. And are we going to keep letting them have first worst? I think it's enough already. I think they need to pay for what they've done, and it needs to stop. And if we can be less reliant on China, I applaud it.
Well, it's really interesting because, Taiwan actually being deeply skeptical of any information coming out of China and actually doing, social media monitoring around this stuff, discovered that this was happening. And I think actually reported it to the World Health Organization at the end of December, but was just kind of pushed back because technically from the WHO perspective, they don't exist. It's actually the Chinese perspective, which governs Taiwan. And we know what you just told us what the Chinese government or Chinese Communist Party perspective was.
It's astonishing to me that a country, an entity, however your political view views Taiwan, it doesn't make a difference. It makes a difference to the Taiwanese people, of course, but it doesn't make a difference in the conversation we're having at the moment. Someone knew of the truth, someone reported it to the World Health Organization, and they were, for lack of a better word, blown off and ignored because they were from Taiwan. Had that information been properly distributed, had the genome sequence at the time been properly distributed, we would not be losing 6 or 7 or 10,000 lives. We would not be losing 10 million jobs. There was plenty known by China, and you could say protected by those who support China, that they did not share. And Taiwan, and I believe it was a doctor, if I'm not mistaken, who pointed it out, or a vice minister, I don't remember exactly, tried to point it out and were brushed off. And again, we're dealing in 2.5 or 3 week periods right now. I mean, every day feels like it's 72 hours to a week. I feel like I'm aging and getting more gray by the day. But you have an extra month and a half, an extra month at the time Taiwan reported this. What could we have done with that? How many lives could we have saved and protected? But it didn't matter to China. They controlled everything. And they control what's happening now as well. I mean, we are in the position where we are at their mercy. And it drives me crazy because if I were China, and I'm getting a little off topic here, but if I were China and I knew that I caused this, and when I say caused it, give them the benefit of the doubt and say they didn't create it, but they let it come over here. They knew 5 million people were leaving the province. Why aren't there giant cargo planes, huge, massive fleets of cargo planes coming from China right now with all of the essential PPE that the doctors, first responders, nurses, healthcare providers need? Why? Not like they can't nationalize the factories and make it, which we all know they've done and sold to other countries. Why don't they have 200, 300, 400 cargo planes back and forth with masks and shields and gowns? Why aren't they helping us solve the problem they created? Because it's beneficial for them not to. And that's where we're at. Not only did they cause it, not only did they hide it, now they're not trying to help fix it. And the little bit that they're doing, and I know they've sent some stuff and we've been able to buy some stuff. I mean, $467 million in goods was sold to two nations that are not the United States last week. Why don't we have all of these goods? Not our government's fault, it's China's fault.
You know, we also have reports from, I think, Australia that talk about how the Chinese Communist Party, through proxy companies, was actually buying up all this type of protective equipment out of Australia while it knew that this pandemic was happening and spreading.
And of course, you can ask the question, were they buying it up because they had many, many, many more deaths and many, many, many more people sick in China that they let on, that they told us about and let on? Or were they buying it up to capitalize on the market and monetize the opportunity, for lack of a better word? I think it probably in the end was a combination of both.
It's astounding when you put it that way. So do you not believe the statistics coming out of China?
I don't. I don't, not at all. I mean, and I'm not a conspiratorial person, so I don't go with all the theories that I hear about these things. But there are reports of the amount of cell phones in Wuhan and Hubei, going down by 20 million cell phone lines. Who knows? The truth is, last year they added cell phones during this time. Now they've lost 10 or 20 million lines. Doesn't make a lot of sense. There's reports out of there that the number of urns from the cremated bodies has been just astronomical, well beyond 3,000, into the hundreds of thousands. I don't know if it's true. What I do know is China is a confined, populated place, and there are people on top of people there. And if we just look at New York City, as an example of the closest thing to people on top of people. We have 60,000 diagnoses there, which probably means 3 times that because there's not testing yet for everybody. Maybe it's more than that. How does Wuhan and China only have 80,000 total diagnoses when the United States is eclipsing 250,000 in a spread out, wide, partially unpopulated part of our country? How is that happening? And if you just look at New York versus the Hubei province, there are more people there and they have less diagnosis or an equivalent amount. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So no, I don't think the numbers that they've reported are accurate. And again, I think it's intentional. And I think that the political world and the physicians that are dealing with this, Dr. Fauci and those other people that are doing this, they have come around and said that in the last few days. I think even Vice President Pence came out and said they withheld information and their numbers are not correct. So I think as our case proceeds forward, as the Berman Law Group pushes this case forward, and as we gather evidence, we will see more and more of the misinformation, to be kind, the misinformation that China has put out there.
Well, we've been documenting at the Epoch Times essentially all of these lines of evidence. I mean, recently there's been, I don't know if it's been confirmed yet, but the intelligence community, the CIA, believe that the numbers are grossly underreported. There's a preponderance of evidence of that the numbers just simply aren't realistic, and there also that there is more a second wave potentially coming in China because of what they've done.
I think that is true. I think that the numbers are going to be, and I'm not a scientist, nor am I a doctor, nor am I a lawyer. I'm a spokesperson, but I can read and I can look at evidence and see what it looks like. And I've done a lot of reading about it and looked at a lot of evidence. And if we are looking at, God forbid, 100,000 to 200,000 deaths, how is it possible that in a province and even a country with, what, 1 billion people, the numbers are so staggeringly lower than what we have? Because it originated there. It was there. Yes, they locked down the city, but they waited until after the Lunar New Year's dinner, where they had about 120,000 people. So we've seen how it can spread. We've seen how it mutates. There's no way that the numbers they put out are accurate.
You know, I appreciated you earlier making the point that you're not basically stepping out against the Chinese people here. You're putting the responsibility squarely on the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party that controls it. We actually, at the Epoch Times, we call it CCP virus, actually, for this reason, you know, among many, to kind of create that clear differentiation.
It makes a lot of sense. We, as a law firm, try to restrict naming the virus because it's a legal proceeding, so we don't want to name the virus. But I've heard President Trump call it the China virus. I've heard the CCP virus. I've read it. I've seen it. There is no question that the leaders of China and the CCP knew about the virus long before we did. There is no question that they intentionally did not tell us for their own economic benefit. So as far as we're concerned, you can label it however you like. We're just very careful about it, but we know where it originated and we know who's responsible.
Jeremy, there have been multiple lawsuits begun now on this issue. I think yours in Florida is the first one to be filed. There's another one in Texas that we're aware of, and I know there's others. Can you tell me a bit more about what the implications of that are for this case?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lawsuit in Texas. There's a lawsuit in Nevada that we're aware of. There's a lawsuit in California that we're aware of. And there very well may be other ones filed that we are unaware of as of yet. And I expect more to be filed. I'm sure you saw the legislation put forth today by the congressman from Texas about lifting the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. So as that propels itself forward, I won't be surprised to see more people copy what we've done. Sometimes in cases, and we've had experience with this in the past, you'll represent a class or subclasses of people. So here, for example, our firm will represent um, restaurants, individuals who have passed away, individuals who have been diagnosed, individuals who have been exposed directly to it but not been able to get a test, large businesses, small businesses, different types like that. Those will all be classes. So we could have 20 to 30 subclasses in our class action. When there are multiple lawsuits, multiple class actions filed around the country, the court, in its wisdom, may decide that it has more power to consolidate it into one courthouse in front of one judge. So that may give it more gravitas. That may do exactly what it's doing now. But the idea of multiple lawsuits being consolidated so that there's not a ton of overlap and discovery is often happens in these types of cases. So if that were to happen, we would ask that it be consolidated in Miami with all of the cases from around the country brought to Miami. And we've done that against 41 U.S. banks in the past when class actions were filed in Miami. We filed, and then someone filed in Philadelphia, someone in Texas, California, and that was all brought in multi-district litigation by the panel to Miami. That happened in Chinese drywall, which we spoke about a little earlier. It was all brought in New Orleans, even though there were cases all over the southeastern United States, and that very well may happen here.
Jeremy, you just mentioned Chinese drywall and this very interesting way in which the judge was able to compel the Chinese Communist Party to actually deliver money ultimately by, threatening to prevent port calls and this sort of thing. I'm wondering if you could look into your, background of different cases that you've done, or maybe just cases that exist that would help us understand how it is that you could get the Chinese Communist Party to actually be forced to deliver on a verdict, assuming that there is a verdict that in the favor of the plaintiffs.
There are a few ways that we could do that. And yes, it's happened before. And yes, I've been a part of cases like that in the past. There was a case against Libya some time ago. I believe it was a Pan Am airplane where 103 people died. And Libya wanted to continue to participate, or at that time it may have been start again participating in our economy with trade and relief and different things. In order to do that, they had to settle their debts with society before they did that. And part of that, and this fell under the terrorism exception to the FSIA, part of that is you have to pay your judgments. So if there are outstanding judgments, they have to be paid. Otherwise, why would you be allowed to come participate in society? And we'll talk about China in regard to that the same way, but they ended up paying $2.7 billion in that case. We had a case when I was practicing that was against Cuba, another communist country. And it was actually against Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and the party and the country. Again, not against the people, because it wasn't their fault. And we got a $1,179,000,000 verdict, which ended up going up to $2.8 billion. And we were able to collect part of that verdict under that same FSIA exception for terror, because you'll know that under President Obama, relations with Cuba were being normalized. The start had occurred. Well, in order to fully normalize relations, you must settle your debts to society. And so that's what happened in that case. They had to start paying their judgments. And I think there were 11 or 12, and they're still being paid today. We know that relations have kind of neutralized at the moment, and that's not exactly going forward. But when they want to do it again, and when we want to do it, that will have to be satisfied. Now, the entire judgment does not always get satisfied, but a large portion of it can. And in the Chinese drywall case, which is a completely different type of case, it was a business issue. China made drywall. It was defective. It was harmful to people and homes, and they did not prevent it from coming over here. So after we settled with NOF, which was the German corporation which produced drywall in China, the remaining group, which already had a verdict against it, was Taishan Gypsum, a nationalized Chinese corporation supported by the country and the party. And the threats by the judge and the plaintiff's lawyers, because of their breach of the commercial exception or the commercial law in their own country and in our country, which affected our people and their homes, we were able to bring them to bear to get them to pay a substantial amount of money. And there's a lot of that in this case. That was a multi-district litigation with thousands of plaintiffs. This will be a multi-district litigation potentially, or a multi-district of classes, or a class action. It can be any of them, where millions of people will be represented. And that is, I can't stress enough how crucial it is for people to get behind this, because this is the remedy. Monetary compensation is the only remedy we can seek. And it's the only way to get back some of what we've lost. It cannot bring back lives. If we lose 5,000, 6,000, 10,000, 30,000 people, all we can get for that is compensation. Why would we not figure out an exception to the FSIA, or get rid of it altogether and pursue this against China? There's only one answer, and that is politics. And if politics decide to get in the way, then people won't be compensated for what happened. We don't want to see that happen. That is why the branches of government are separate. We want the politicians to get behind it, and I think that momentum started today with the bill that was put forth. And it has to happen. No political solution is going to solve this problem with China. China has had multiple political solutions under governments that I supported, and we haven't gotten anywhere with it. This stuff keeps happening, and this is absolutely got to stop. It's enough. We have had enough. Our people have had enough. They're sitting in their homes. Everything's being done by Skype like we're doing right now, or Zoom, or whatever it is. We can't even relate as human beings, which is what we are as Americans best at. I mean, we are best at being kind and caring to one another. And of course, something like this brings out our kindness and our caring and our concern for our fellow Americans. But when this is all over, and when we pass through this horrible stage, who's going to solve the problem that was created? Who's going to bring the economy back the way it was? Who's going to pay for what was lost? And in our opinion, and in the Berman Law Group's opinion, and in my own personal opinion, China has to pay for what they've done. Do we have any indication that they will do that? Not without a whole lot of pressure and a whole lot of risk to their GDP. And to me, affecting their bottom line will affect them responding to this lawsuit.
So I have a whole bunch of questions for you now, but quickly tell us, FSIA, what is it?
Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. It is the act which prevents you from suing foreign nations unless they violate certain rules and exceptions. And under those exceptions, you can sue them. And that is how the Berman Law Group is doing it. Okay,
great. So you're imagining a scenario here where basically, again, assuming that the verdict was, in your favor and in the favor of the plaintiffs, basically the judge could say, China, you don't get access to the U.S. economy until you deliver.
I would love for a judge to say that. I think that the judge would be hard-pressed to say you don't get access to the American economy. But I think there are ways to hamper their access to the American economy, which would cost them hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And one of the things that can be done, and it's been done before, and if they don't appear, if they don't respond, we can pursue this case without them being a defendant present. If the judge allows us to go forward, which we hope that she would, and we expect that she would, and it's happened in the past, we can go forward, try the case without China present, get the judgment or the verdict, as you've said, and then we can go start collecting on Chinese assets in the United States. So China has bank accounts. China has buildings. China has, I can't even imagine what they have in the United States, but they own a lot of stuff in a lot of places. We can execute on those um, assets all over the United States. And that's how a lot of these other cases started getting paid. They started executing on bank accounts and assets. And if it's done properly and it's approved by the judge, it can be done. And that will start to put some pain into China's pocketbook. And if we can put a little pain into China's pocketbook, it becomes, and no pun intended, but it becomes a conundrum for China. They have an issue. They've got to now deal with it. If we allow them to continue to put their heads in the sand, like an ostrich, like they did with this virus, and we don't apply pressure through monetary damage to them, they're never going to step up to the plate. Look at what's happening now, like I said earlier, with the planes. Where are all the PPE that they've produced? Why isn't it here? Why aren't they solving the problem they created? So we have to apply legal, political, business, and economic pressure to the Chinese government and the CCP to get them to do the right thing. Sometimes people just don't want to do the right thing. Sometimes governments don't want to do the right thing, but it's time we make them do the right thing.
You know, I have to say this, and I think I know your position on this, but the Chinese Communist Party position is that they've done a fantastic job in containing this, and that the world should thank them.
It's not even funny. I'm laughing because it's such an asinine statement that they've made, and I've heard the statement. They have unleashed hell on our planet. They have specifically unleashed hell on the United States. And let's not forget Italy and Europe and all the places. For them to say that just proves exactly what I said, which is unless we force them to open their eyes and see what they've done, they're never going to do the right thing. They have not allowed, they have intentionally withheld information that has caused a harm to the world that has never been seen. That's the fact. No one can dispute that. You can dispute what day it happened on. You can dispute how it happened. You can dispute whether it was the wet markets or the biolab or the level 4 lab in Wuhan, all those disputes. But it in fact happened, and it in fact was a result of their, at a minimum, silence, and at maximum, intentional, reckless behavior to affect the rest of the world, including our country, the United States.
Jeremy, you mentioned that you're looking to get people to get behind this lawsuit. And I'm wondering, how will people, I say that in quotes, getting behind help you, first of all? And second of all, how can, the man on the street, common folks, I'm not talking about, a DC here, actually contribute in this way if they were interested?
It's one of those things that requires momentum. It requires a buy-in. It requires everyone, or most everyone, to believe that it's the right thing to do to recover for this wrong. And we have, since we started this lawsuit on March 12th, we have gotten thousands of contacts. And I say contacts because it's phone calls, emails, website inquiries, different forms that social media, that of people that want to be part of this, want to be part of the movement. And we've started, the Berman Law Group and Lucas Compton together started the demandchinapay.org. So it's demandchinapay.org, which will take you to a spot where you can immediately join in the lawsuit. And it's been remarkable, the response. And we've been very careful about it. I think it's important to allow the country to get through this. And, there's always cycles to terrible things. There's what happened, why it happened. There's dealing with while you're in it, dealing with it. There's dealing with the tragedies that are occurring. And then hopefully soon, as we move out of it, there will be, wait a second, why the hell did this happen? Why did this happen? Wait, they knew about this? And then there's who's responsible, and how do we make them pay for it? And we think that as soon as this horrible situation that everyone is in, and there are people that are just going through absolute hell. Some of the emails we get, some of the inquiries. I've lost my job. I can't pay for food. My father has COVID-19. I've lost my mother already, and my sister's on a respirator. And they have no money. They have no ability to survive the next day. Thank God for Americans and what they do to band together. But it's a very difficult time because 93% of the country is shelter in place. So even with banding together, we don't have the things that we normally would have in a hurricane or a natural disaster where people are able to come from all over and help. I mean, we have first responders, doctors, nurses dying because we can't get the proper equipment, or because the virus is so bad that it just happens. I mean, there are doctors in New York, doctors all over. We had a nurse here in Miami die yesterday. It's horrible. So we would love for everybody to go to demandchinapay.org and look at what we're doing and support it from a just getting involved standpoint. It doesn't require anything, but we want to be part of it. And that's for the regular guy on the street, as you said, all the way up to a massive corporation like Coca-Cola, for that matter, or the airlines. This applies to everybody.
So demandchinapay.org. I'll just say that again for the benefit of our viewers. Now, but are you suggesting, based on what you're saying, that you're looking for more plaintiffs? And second of all, tell me a little bit about the different groups of plaintiffs that you have already engaged, or some examples that come to mind, please.
Sure. The suit itself, the lawsuit, can always use more plaintiffs. There's no harm to having millions of plaintiffs, to being able to say to a sitting federal judge, Judge, we have millions of people that have contacted us. That's how serious this is. Or to saying to your local senator or your local congressman, we have millions of people who have contacted us. There is power in numbers. I mean, we have seen that through elections. We have seen that through movements in this country. We have seen that through women's rights and equality and everything else. It's always the movement of the people that changes things for the better, always. And this can be a movement of the people using their courthouse to collect for what they've been wronged by. And so, yes, we would love everyone's participation. And when I say everyone, I mean it. We would love, our lawyers would love to walk into court and say, Judge, we currently have contracts with 5.5 million Americans. I mean, the power behind that. And when we know everyone won't do it, political views or just going through a lot of stuff right now, they're not thinking about this, but everyone that can, let's put some power behind it. And the types of individuals and classes, we have, I don't know the number, but dozens of people that have been diagnosed with COVID-19. We have people who have died from it. We have people, when I say people, I mean their families, obviously. We have individuals who are currently diagnosed with it in the hospital. We have people on respirators. We have people who have come out of it, thank God, and are in the recovery stages. We have people where it's passed, but now they've given it to their family member. We have children. When I say children, I mean their parents are representing them in the lawsuit. We have elderly. We have a wonderful family, a gentleman named Ray Bodine out of Texas, whose aunts, who were nuns their whole lives and then teachers, they both were diagnosed in a nursing home in Washington State, and one of them passed away days after the diagnosis, and the other is still alive, wondering what in the world just happened. And, again, why? I mean, why? Why not just tell us it's coming? Why not just contain it there? I don't want to get off track. We have small businesses, hundreds of them. We have individuals who have lost their job. We have individuals who have been furloughed, laid off. We have businesses that have had to lay off 1,900 people. Restaurants, as you can imagine, restaurants are taking one of the biggest hits in the economy. We have restaurant after restaurant. We just got one yesterday that literally has nearly 2,000 employees and is down to four because of this. And this is a great guy, a great human being who's built it from ground up. And, it's horrible. It's horrible. So those are the classes. What we don't have yet, and what we would really like, but again, you run into legal counsel and politics and China. Where are the big businesses? The ones that deal with China on a regular basis. We don't have them yet. We would like to. I think it would be very powerful. But are they willing to take a stand for their employees and for their people? And it'll be interesting to see. And I do think that over time that will happen. But that's not something that happens at this stage, nor is it something we push for at this stage, because we're just hoping that they can employ people and let them keep their jobs and hope that they can help sustain the economy. Those are some of the classes. And one more very important one, which I should never fail to mention. We have doctors who have gotten it. We have nurses who have gotten it. We have healthcare providers who have gotten it. We have EMT who have gotten it, or EMS personnel who have gotten it. So we have the first responders and the healthcare providers who have gotten it. And those people are running to the problem. They are sprinting to help from all over the country to help. And the fact that they are not protected properly because China makes all the things we need to protect them is one of the saddest things I've ever seen. And the watching and listening to the children whose parents are doctors and are struggling and have been diagnosed, it's unbearable to listen to, but it's the reality we're in right now.
Do From what you just said, do I understand correctly that you're in support of, reshoring these kind of manufacturing of these types of items? Or we actually just had someone on the other night talking about how 90% of the medical ingredients are actually made in China, and the national security implications of that.
I would, and it's interesting to talk about politics for a moment. I would never have thought this before. This was not my political theory or my personal political way. My personal political way was to, get along with everybody and allow things, if they're done right, to go forward. I don't know how we continue this way. This is not safe. It is not a proper way to receive our medical equipment or receive our medication. I think there's a statistic out there that 90% of the equipment is made there, or at least the materials for it, and then 90% of our pharmaceuticals are made there. And I don't know if that number is exactly correct, but I know it's a large number. How can we continue? If they're going to keep doing this, it's never been this bad. So I understand how it has continued until now. But at some point, don't we as a people, as a country, have to put our foot down and say no more? And that is where I think we're at. I don't think we're at that today because we're in the middle of the crisis. But don't you see, or I should pose the question in general, how can we not when this is over and we've lost thousands of people's lives and trillions of dollars in economic, I mean, how many people are going to lose their homes? How many people are going to not be able to function when this is over? I mean, I heard someone on the news yesterday talking about, you don't realize the implications of how far this goes. So yes, maybe there's rent abatement in New York City, for example. Maybe there's mortgage abatement, which I don't know if there is or isn't, but maybe there is. But what about their credit? What happens afterwards when they try to recover or they try to get a job and they can't afford to even, get a car to get to work, which maybe in New York City isn't a problem, but in a lot of the other places in the country, this is going to have lasting, detrimental, devastating effects. And we go back to the same question. Why? All because China wanted to protect their economic interests and not let the world know what was coming, and not doing their job to conceal it so that they could celebrate their new year. And with all due respect, That is unacceptable.
How much in damages are you seeking from the Chinese Communist Party?
When we filed the lawsuit March 12th, we thought that the damage would be somewhere in the hundreds of billions of dollars range. Um, we didn't see a $2.2 trillion stimulus package coming. We didn't see 10 million people losing their jobs in 2 weeks. The number is astronomical, and it's probably a number that China, even though they're a world superpower, and I use that term, even though they're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and even though they control much of the manufacturing for the world, it's probably a number they can't even afford. So the question is, what's fair at the end of the day, and how can we create a solution that allows us to go forward and feel like we've gotten compensated for what's happened? It's going to be in the trillions of dollars. There's no way around it. That doesn't mean they'll pay that, but that is what we will be seeking.
You know, one thing that just strikes me here is that in these types of suits, not this specific type of suit, but a type of suit where there's a large settlement that's awarded by the judge, by the court. There's some cases where the person that has to pay or the company that has to pay just says, "Okay, I'm bankrupt. Sorry, can't do." Right? Is this?
Boy, that would be quite a sign of weakness on China's part. And I don't know a lot about China in general. I've been over there, but they don't strike me as a government or as a party that wants to show any weakness at any point. So I would find it very quizzical if they said at any point, we can't afford it. We've caused this to the United States, but we can't afford it. We know that they print money, that they make money, and that their GDP is strong. It is, I'm sure, hurting at the moment, but in general, they benefit from the export to countries all over the world that have been harmed. Yes, I agree. If they were no longer allowed to export to those countries, or their exportation was limited, maybe they couldn't afford it at that point. But at this point, being the world superpower that they are, and certainly they are, being the world's leader in exporting, they certainly can afford to pay for what they've done. I don't see the Communist Party of China or the leaders of China allowing weakness to show through. I see them and their egos showing that they are the strongest country in the world and trying to take advantage of this opportunity to prop up their economy and prop up their standing in the world. So I don't see them essentially filing for bankruptcy, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. I think that would be a very unlikely scenario from our own analysis. Jeremy, we're going to wrap up in a moment. Any final thoughts?
I would just say that there are and have been political solutions to problems in the past that have been effective. There have been agreed upon solutions that have been effective in international disputes. There has never been, at least as far as I know, in the last 100 years, anything like this. And when there is a catastrophe of such epic proportion caused by one entity, meaning the People's Republic of China and the CCP and the associated entities that are part of it. Again, not the Chinese people, the government. How do we not hold them to task? How do we not bring them to bear through the power we have in ceasing business operations with them at some point? I understand the political fallout of how much of our economy relies on China delivering goods to us. I understand that. But isn't it time that we start to change that? And isn't it time that we say to China, you must pay for what you've done to our country? You made a decision not to contain a virus that could affect our country. You made a decision to silence the people who were talking about it. You made a decision not to tell us about it until it was too late. It's time that you pay for what you've done. if you want to participate with our people using your goods, making money for your GDP in our country. And the way to make them pay, and I hope everybody understands this, the way for American citizens to get money into their pocket, again, this is a critical time to be talking about this, but this is for the future, right? We're in the middle of it right now. But the only way to get compensated for this as Americans is through our court system. And we are very blessed in the United States to have this type of court system. They don't have it in China. They do not have it in China. They do not have it many places. But we are allowed to hold bad actors responsible and make them pay for what they've done. And China has notoriously been a bad actor, but here their acts were an egregious damage. It caused egregious damage to our humanity. And as a people, as a group, as citizens together, please join us in trying to demand China pay for what happens. It is a critical movement, and many, many critical movements over time have occurred through our court system. Most things that have had great outcomes for our country occurred as a result of judges and courts that weren't willing to shy away, not willing to, that wouldn't shy away from a challenge like this. And we believe we have the case that will pursue this to the end, whatever that end may be, to help the people of our country. And thank you very much for giving me the time to talk and talk about this. I really appreciate it.
Jeremy Alters, such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much.